Game Design 2, Lecture 6, Segment 4. Let's talk about some different perspectives. So, given what I've covered in the past two segments about reward schedules and other psychological phenomenon, these kind of techniques, tricks, traps that you can use to mind control your players into performing the behaviors that you want them to, be it certain meaningful decisions and experiences and strategies, or maybe more nefarious as microtransactions and getting them to log in daily because you've set up some kind of fixed interval mechanic or reward schedule. I want to talk about using these techniques from these three different perspectives. The first one is going to be from a behaviorist response. Remember, if you were Pavlov, you didn't care about decision. You didn't care about why the subject was making the decision. You just wanted to know, are they performing the behavior that I'm trying to condition? The example is the dog, right? I don't care why the dog is salivating. I just want to figure out if I can make them salivate. For a game designer, I don't care why they're clicking the button or why they're making the microtransaction or why they're buying all the DLC or why they log in every day. I just want them to log in every day, click the button, and buy the DLC. The second perspective is a modern psychologist response. So that's why there are no more behaviorists today, right? People, when they're having a problem with, let's say, their child's behavior, they don't go and see a behaviorist. They're like, I don't know why he's hitting other kids. I just want him to stop hitting other kids. They go to a psychologist because we realize now that the behavior is a result of some cognitive process. The child isn't, what's the word? The child isn't involuntarily hitting other children. There's something going on cognitively, some decision-making process that is fouled up that is causing them to lash out violently. So we don't go to see behaviorists anymore. We go to see psychologists. And then the final approach, it's fun but important to look at it from a more philosophical, where we get into what we actually think about this in society and our own beliefs, our own morals. But no spoilers. Let's dig right in first to the behaviorist response. And for this, the example I'm going to use to illustrate is a game called Cow Clicker. Cow Clicker was made by an individual, pretty well-known researcher by the name of Ian Bogost. And Ian, I'm going to elaborate a little bit, so bear with me. Ian is sick of games like Farmville. Farmville, it's devoid of any meaningful experience. Its gameplay is vapid. It just, all it does is condition through a fixed interval and other Skinner box reward schedules, conditions player to log in, click a cow, and then watch the gameplay itself. He hates these so much that he calls them cow clickers. That's what he calls any kind of Skinner box game actually devoid of any meaningful decision on the player's part. And he decides, you know what? I'm going to expose this injustice. I'm going to make my own game. He calls it Cow Clicker, where the player logs in once every 6 hours, clicks a cow, the cow goes moo, and the player is awarded 1 moonie. So pretty obvious, a fixed interval reward schedule. It's Skinner box. The player should be motivated to log in once every 6 hours. Every 6 hours we see the spike of behavior, and then it flatlines until 6 hours later, and they log in and they get it again. He's like, eventually players are going to realize that this experience, even though I can spend the moonie on blinging out my cow with nose rings and different skins, eventually the players are going to realize that there's really no game here. There's really nothing meaningful or of substance from the meaningful interactive experience standpoint. So he makes it go live on Facebook, and it doesn't exactly go the way Mr. Bogost was hoping. In fact, very quickly, he has over 50,000 unique daily players. And in fact, he even sees some players collecting 4 moonie per day. What does that mean? It means they are maximizing their moonie revenue, their moonie income. They are either setting a timer and waking up in the middle of the night so they can click the cow, or they've shared their account with somebody, or they made about whatever it is. They have deliberately altered their lifestyle so that they can collect Mooney. So Mr. Bogus is like, well, this isn't really going the way I wanted it to. People aren't getting the point. So he decides to make a change, tweaks the mechanics, and monetizes. He lets people spend cash money on the same rewards, the same reinforcers that other people have been grinding 6 hours at a time to get. And you probably all have experienced this, where you spend months trying to get a drop, and then the studio, the game developer, decides, well, we're just going to let people pay $5. What does that do to your experience to date? It completely cheapens it. It ruins it. You're like, I spent all this time and now you're just selling it for $5. I quit. That's, I think, what Mr. Bogost was hoping for, expecting. Oh, and by the way, he also put in certain perks that could only be purchased with cash dollars. How frustrated does pay to win make you? The most famous of which was, I think it was $10 or maybe $20 in order to have a left-facing cow. That's right, $20 to mirror a sprite. And he thought, wow, this is absolutely going to enrage people. They're going to quit. There's going to be a mass exodus. And I will say, haha, I showed you this is no different than Facebook. You should all quit. I'm sorry, no different than Farmville. You should all quit playing that on Facebook as well. But things didn't go exactly the way Ian was hoping. In fact, he started making a bunch of money. So whereas he thought this was going to expose an injustice, it's just too effective. He's got a lot of players and he's making a considerable amount of money. Just not going well for Ian. So he decides to raise the stakes and invents an event called the Cowpocalypse. And in the Cowpocalypse, all the cows are raptured. So when players log in, the squares are empty. Their cow is not present. All the bling, all the skins, all the jewelry, whichever way they were facing, it's just not there. It's just empty. But he didn't remove the functionality. Players could still click an empty square, hear an invisible cow go moo, be awarded one Mooney that they couldn't spend on anything, and guess what happened? Now, yeah, a notable amount of people quit, sure, it's expected, but a considerable portion of the player base continued to play. They continued to log in, click an empty square, and collect Mooney. Why did they do it? Why did players continue to do this after the Cowpocalypse? If you said because they were conditioned to, you're absolutely right. This proves the point that players aren't playing this game because it's fun, because there's meaningful experience, meaningful decisions, because they're somehow relating to or socializing with or exploring or beating or whatever. They're just conditioned because of a Skinner box reward schedule. My example, personal example for this one was when I put WoW down for a number of years, and a buddy of mine said, hey, let's re-roll the rogues, right? And he sent me a scroll of resurrection. I started playing again, and my rogue was right where I left him, somewhere in the Outlands, ready to do my daily quests, because that's what I was doing when I stopped playing. Every day, log in, do my daily faction quest routine, put him right where I left him, and log out. So he was still there, and guess what I did? I saw the yellow spot for my first daily quest, and I went and did it. And I turned it in. I started to go out to the second phase of it, and I was like, what am I doing? Right? There's been 3 expansions since I played last. The gear that I would get from this faction rep is worthless now. I can go out and kill a random mob and get a better piece of gear. So why did I do it? Why did I just pick up and start doing, what I was conditioned to do? That's why I did it. It's not because that quest was awesome and I wanted to do it every day for a month. It wasn't the intrinsic rewarding experience. It was the extrinsic reward that was leading me to grind that same quest over and over. And, WoW does it, Blizzard does it with, raids as well. I'm going to go and run the same raid and kill the same boss over and over and over again until that variable ratio finally procs, finally pays off, and I get that piece of gear that I'm looking for. It's a very effective mechanic for prolonging gameplay, just like all of these other phenomenon that I've discussed will do as well. So from a behaviorist outlook, BOGOst had lots of people logging in, lots of people paying money. It was great. If all we cared about was let's measure the behaviors of the player base, we got a lot of players, they're logging in daily, and they're spending money, no problem. This Skinner box techniques works perfectly. However, what you have to be careful about is something known as the post-reward resetting phenomenon. Because the end of the story, the end of my WoW story, is that once I realized what had happened, I turned it off and I haven't played WoW since. And I'm not knocking WoW or Blizzard. It's a fantastic game. There's lots of meaningful experiences, socialization, interaction, challenge, exploration. There's tons of that in the game. But that particular part of it turned me off, turned the player off. Once the reward ceases, that's what that flat area is. Once people stop playing the game, they're never going to play again. I don't think that 10 years from now, people are going to be, you're not going to have your child, or 50 years from now, your grandchild on your knee and be like, in my day, we had games like Clash of Clans. I'm going to download an iOS emulator so I can show you this Clash of Clans game, right? That doesn't happen, but we do see that happen for really meaningful games like Zelda and Metroid and you name it. So if you are in it for just brainwashing people, by all means, implement some of these Skinner box mechanics. But if you're in it for making meaningful, rewarding experiences, we got to dig a little bit deeper than just looking at behavior. So on that note, we'll start talking about it from a modern day psychologist point of view. And my example for this one is the Book It program. If you're not familiar, the Book It program, the goal was to get children to love to read more, but not just to read more because that's just behavior, to love and want to read, to enjoy literature. In the Book It program, every time a child read a book, they were given a star. Every time they put that star on their button. Every time they collect 5 stars, they take that button to Pizza Hut. They get a personal pan pizza. Tiny little 10-inch pepperoni or cheese, your choice. Don't have to share it with dad. Don't have to share it with your brother. You earned it. Oh, by the way, that's fixed ratio. It's actually 2 fixed ratios. 5 stars gets you a pizza. That's a 5-to-1 fixed ratio. And 1 book equals 1 star. That's a 1-to-1 fixed ratio. And that, side note, particular type of a 1-to-1 fixed ratio is known as continuous reinforcement. So whenever I do the action, I get the reward right away. Like whenever I spend the money, I get my pack of cards right away. That is known as continuous reinforcement fixed ratio. So back to the Book It program. Even though lots of books were read, lots of stars were given out, and lots of pizzas were eaten, they found 3 particular things that were a little bit opposed to the goal of getting students to love to read and to enjoy literature. In fact, it led one researcher to state that if we want a society full of obese, illiterate children, we should continue the Book It program. Because of these 3 things. Number 1, probably the most obvious, students weren't really reading the book. Now, did they just lie about it? Did they go get a star from somewhere else? Did they just flip through and their eyes looked at every page, but they didn't actually read? Could be any of those. I liken it to, I ask students, did you read the FSO assignment? They say, well, I scrolled to the bottom. But did you read it? Did you understand it? Did you go into it with the intent of, I want to get something out of what I'm reading so that I can be better suited for whatever in the future? So it's kind of hard to put a pin in, did students read it or not, when we're talking about the Book It program. So here's how researchers studied it. They gave 2 students this identical test. One student, student A, said, yes, I read the book. Student B said, no, I didn't read the book. So they give them both an identical comprehension test. Both students complete the tests, they take them, they mix them up, they hand them to what is known as an independent coder, somebody who knows nothing about the method of the test or the subjects. And they say, hey, independent third-party coder, tell me who read the book, student A or student B. And do you know what that independent third-party coder says? I don't know. Based on their responses, I cannot tell who read the book and who didn't. So either they lied, they skimmed, but the point is they did not retain. They did not retain the information, which isn't really fulfilling the goal of the Book It program. The second thing they found, pretty straightforward, students chose to read the books with the least amount of words in them. The shortest books, picture books, Dr. Seuss books, whatever. So if one book equals 1 star, well, I'm going to do as little effort as possible. I'm going to meta this sucker. It's a system, right? It's a game. A gamer is going to game, right? If there's a loophole or a dominant strategy in your mechanics, they're going to find it and they're going to exploit it. Not shame on them, shame on you, Book It program developers. And by the way, more recent Book It programs, they've got permutation upon evolution of whatever, where now it's a sliding scale based on the color of the book, and you get certain. I'm not talking about that. Let's not belabor the analogy. Point is, students weren't loving to read. They were reading as little as possible to get the reward that they wanted, that extrinsic reward. The third thing that researchers found was a little bit harder to get at. It's a little bit harder for us to just kind of guess, but it is absolutely related to this post-reward resetting phenomenon, in that they found that once the reward was removed, the behavior didn't just decline, it diminished below the starting baseline. So what I mean by that is they did a study, several studies, studied many students. One in particular case was a little girl who her parents said, oh, she loves to read. She reads all the time for fun. She's always in books. It's great. So they're, okay, perfect candidate to study. They studied her reading habits in the summer after the 3rd grade. So summer after the 3rd grade, she's reading, they study what she reads, they record it all. She goes into 4th grade, and in 4th grade, she first experiences the Book It program. She reads a lot of books, she eats a lot of pizza. Then they study her reading habits in the summer after the 4th grade. And guess what? She read less than the previous summer. Why? Because there's no more reward. When you are paying students to read with pizza, after you stop paying them, they're going to stop reading. And we've seen evidence of this in many places. Another particularly poignant example came in a problem that the government saw with Native American high school aged students on American reservations going to high school. So these are Native American children living on a reservation in the United States, just had a terrible track record for getting them to attend high school. So the government does what the government does. They threw a bunch of money at the problem and said, students, we will pay you to go to school. We'll pay you to go to high school. So guess what? A lot of students starting to go to school. I would conject that the quality of education probably went down. I don't know this. I'm assuming this occurred because students were there just for the paycheck instead of learning. But what I can say empirically, what they studied was after the program ended, after they stopped paying students to go to high school, even students that were going prior to the program stopped going. So when they removed the reward, the behavior also ceased. So you have to look deeper than just behavior at why your player is performing that behavior. Are they doing it because they love the game, or are they doing it because you brainwashed them, you've conditioned them to log in every day and click buttons like a rat in a box? And if you're like, I don't care, well, that's where we get into the final look, the philosophical response. And yes, it's photoshopped, but it's a sim playing The Sims, ignoring her sim baby on sim fire. The question is it wrong? Is it nefarious? Should you be able to, or should you look to use these techniques, these tricks, these traps, these known phenomenon in order to condition your player to play the game, to make the microtransaction? Are you willing to do that? I have a lot of students say, of course, I'm not forcing them. I'm not stealing their money. I'm not, making them make those decisions. I equate that to, I didn't push them in that pit. I just dug the pit, covered it with sticks and leaves, put a reward on the other side of it and pointed them at it and said, look at that shiny thing. Yeah, you might not have made them fall in the pit, but you set up the mechanics. Another question I ask students to kind of get at this is, would you make a cow clicker? If you could have 50,000 players and be raking in a significant amount of money by conditioning players to click cows in Cow Clicker 2 with a obvious Skinner box fixed interval reward schedule, would you do it? Would you do it? Raise your hand. Would you do it? My next question is, would you make ethnic cleansing 2 if it would make you a bunch of money? Remember, way back to lecture 2, ethnic cleansing was the game where the goal was, it was made by white supremacists. The goal was to kill all people of color. It was a racist hate game. Would you make that game if you could make a bunch of money? What's the difference? I'm not forcing people to play it. Well, the difference is here. And I don't mean my head, I mean your head. This is where all philosophical debates end. I can't tell you what is right and wrong. I've avoided it all month. I've taught you these mechanics. I've told you they're tools. Tools are neither good or bad. It's how they are used, misused, abused. Guns don't kill people. People holding guns kill people with guns. The gun is just a tool. Same thing with all of these techniques and whatnot. So you have to ask yourself, are you willing, do you think you'll be able to go to sleep at night if you know that you've tricked somebody into making a purchase or to spending time that maybe could have been spent better? And you might be shocked at the actual, number of cases where adults will spend money on games instead of things like rent or medicine or food for themselves or for their children. I've talked to many soldiers that return from deployment and they're like, man, we were over there in Iraq or Afghanistan and we didn't have anything to spend our money on. We were getting paid, but room and board was covered, 3 square meals a day. I was spending $2,000 a month on Clash of Clans. And then they usually follow it up with, I really wish I would have saved that money because I could use it now. Again, I'm not getting down on Clash of Clans. They didn't make those individuals spend that money, but they sure did set up a system that enticed them, that affected their cognitive decision-making process to move them closer to that buy decision, because that's how these studios earn their revenue and make the paychecks for the developers. It is very likely that many of my students will work in a studio where you're making a free-to-play game that relies on microtransactions for revenue. And that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just want you to go in with eyes open with the full story so that you can know the decisions that you're making, know the type of game that you're making, know the potential effects that it's going to have on your players, and hopefully sleep at night with your decision. And if you take anything beyond this month, other than the required curriculum teaching points, I hope you take forward Fairchild's challenge to stretch a little, go above and beyond. Reach higher than just the lowest hanging fruit of operant conditioning, microtransactions, and loot boxes. There are other ways to engage your player that I believe are much more meaningful and longer lasting and that affect not just the decision in the now, but kind of how I look at decision making for my life. All of you have probably had that game from your past that it kind of changed you. It kind of made you who you are today. And I dare say it probably motivated you to pursue a career in game development and subject yourself to the experience that is Full Sail University and make a career out of it for the rest of your life. So don't worry, I'm going to discuss some of that in the next segment where we talk about self-determination theory and some, of the higher fruit, not the low-hanging fruit that you can strive for, reach for, and use to engage your players in meaningful ways. They're going to have those lasting effects. So stay tuned. Next segment, we'll talk self-determination theory.